Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's session. I'm not sure what's going on with the camera, Javin. I think it's still to slight tilt somewhere. I think it's wobbled somewhere. I hope everyone's enjoying this nice weather we've got again today, which is quite pleasant and delightful. We have got a great session for you. It's a Wednesday evening session, so we have got one of our partners, and I have got Yin from Speech and Language Link, who is going to be talking to us about supporting literacy for pupils with speech, language and communication needs. So I'm going to pass straight over to Yin, whichever corner Gavin's got her hiding in. Which corner is she hiding in?
Where do you think she is?
One of those two.
One of those two? Well, you'd be wrong because she's down there.
Oh no, you're down there. Okay, fair enough. So over to you, Yin.
Thank you. So hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Yin Colligan. I am a speech and language therapist from Speech and Language Link. And this webinar is about literacy, the importance of speech and language skills as a foundation to literacy, and how we can use speech and language to support reading and writing, as well as help our learners with SLCN to develop literacy skills. So going on to the next slide, please. First, a quick introduction to Speech and Language Link. So I'm part of a team of therapists that work at Speech and Language Link, and we provide a range of speech and language screening and speech and language screening and intervention packages for schools to deliver. And we've been around for, let's say, about 21 years now. So we've been around for a while, and we keep getting bigger. And we look forward to launching our Little Link package in the autumn term. And if you don't know about this will be a universal language screen and 12-week enrichment programme for early year settings. And we're across 4,000 schools, and we work with 65,000 pupils through your brilliant TAs and other staff supporting the screening and intervention of your pupils. So next slide. Thank you. So the aims of today we're going to explore how speech and language skills are vital for literacy success. And this is a topic I get asked about a lot, especially in school training sessions. And there's always kind of a noticeable kind of light bulb moment when we start making this link between spoken language and literacy. It's so important when teachers think about literacy and they can link it to those speech and language skills. They kind of go, oh, right, okay, this is, it's so necessary to be thinking about speech and language when it comes to literacy. So today I'll take you through why speech and language are so important for literacy, how they're connected to literacy. I'll talk about profiles of children with certain needs, so how specific deficits in verbal skills can potentially lead to particular literacy difficulties. I'll be focusing on reading for this one. And then on to some practical tips to support children's literacy through speech and language work, including how to bump up literacy for those students with speech, language and communication needs. And there should be some time for questions afterwards, so do ask away. Okay, so why it matters to talk about speech and language and its relation to literacy. You may already have a hunch about the link between literacy and speech and language, but today I hope to make it quite explicit, practical and relevant to your everyday life in schools. So this link matters because literacy is so central to learning, as you know. Reading, writing, understanding instructions, even in maths problems and across the curriculum, these are literacy tasks, but literacy does start with oral language. And just for a moment, have a little reflection. Think of pupils you know who struggle with reading or writing. Could potentially any of them have speech or language difficulties too? Do you know if any of them do have speech and language difficulties? It's just something to have a little think about. Okay. So I hope that was a helpful few moments, and maybe you'll find yourself thinking back to that exercise later on while we explore this, when we explore this further. So, going on to research. So let's start with what the research tells us. Firstly, good talkers make good readers. So better talkers are better readers. And that's a study by Whitehurst and Lonergan. So Whitehurst and Lonergan in 1998 pulled together lots of research about how young children develop literacy skills. And they found that children who are better at talking and understanding spoken language will be better at reading and understanding text as well. The second study by Yanning Cheng and colleagues found that oral language is essential for learning to read. So what they did here was they used a computer model that learnt to read, basically a simulation of how reading skills develop in children. And they taught it spoken language first, then they added reading instruction to see how it learnt to read. And the model showed that oral language skills are essential for reading success. When it was given strong spoken language knowledge, so good vocabulary and sentence structure, etc., it could read well. But when the oral language knowledge was weak, it struggled to read even with phonics input. So the takeaway here is learning to read requires strong spoken language skills. And then a third piece of research, early language difficulties can predict long-term literacy struggles. Early language struggles can lead to long-term issues. So Law et al., Law, Charlton and Asmussen in 2017 analysed how language skills at age 5 linked to later outcomes in the study, pulling together lots of different studies. And they found that those with difficulties with oral language at age 5 didn't meet the expected standard in English by the end of primary school and were 4 times more likely to have reading difficulties as adults. So if a child starts school with weak language skills, they're more likely to struggle. Takeaways here, that better talkers are better readers, oral language is essential for learning to read, and early language predict long-term literacy struggles. We must support spoken verbal skills, both expressive and understanding of spoken language, to ensure that our children are good readers and writers. Thank you. So, how are speech and language skills linked to literacy? So we've got a house here as an analogy, and I can't take the credit for this analogy. Instead, the idea comes from a speech and language pathologist, which is Australian, called Karina Murphy. So it's hopefully a very useful way to look at how literacy skills develop. So we're going to start with the foundations of the house. So the foundations of our literacy house are oral language skills, specifically oral receptive language, what spoken language the child can understand, and oral expressive language, so what spoken language the child can use. And with typically developing children, they start to develop oral language skills from birth, or some might say even earlier, and they start to build these strong foundations to their literacy house really early on. So first they build up their vocabulary. They learn to understand words, and they also learn to say words. And over time, they don't just learn more words, but also learn words in more depth. So they figure out how words are connected, understand how some words have the same meanings. Some same sounding words have different meanings, and there's the slight nuanced differences between certain words. And as vocabulary grows, grammar starts developing too. So children start to learn how the words fit together, and they begin to talk in short phrases. Then they build to longer, better formed sentences, and word endings and sentence structure both develop. And they also learn to understand grammar. They learn to understand the structure of words and sentences, and how what structures are used can change the meaning of what is said. For example, the boy pushed the cow and the cow pushed the boy mean different things because of where the subjects and the objects are in the sentence. And then narrative skills. So as you can see, the oral receptive narrative and oral expressive narrative skills, these start to emerge as well. And children learn that stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they listen to stories and they learn to understand the structure and the themes. And they start by telling stories, simple stories like what happened at nursery and what happened when they went to the park. So they're listening to stories and they're understanding stories and they're telling stories as well. And also later on, they're starting to make up their own stories. They're using their imagination to make up stories of their own, and their stories become more detailed and more complex as they get older. So these oral language skills are the foundations of our house. They're the foundations of our literacy house. And as mentioned before, from the research I mentioned, a strong oral language skills support literacy skills. Oral language development starts way before reading and writing. It starts from birth or just before. And reading and writing skills can emerge in a very basic form just before children start school. So there's a kind of big gap between oral spoken language and oral receptive language and reading and writing skills. So when we start reading, we're not starting from scratch because we're hooking new written words onto what we already know from spoken language. And when we start writing, we have all the skills from talking, the word knowledge, grammatical structure, and the ability to tell a story, to give meaning and form to what we write. So ultimately, children who start school with strong oral language skills will find it easier to understand what they read and find it easier to express themselves better in writing. So going on to the next slide. Okay, I thought it'd be kind of good to give you a little case study, like a made-up case study of this child called Jack, just to kind of illustrate how this works. So this baby Jack, even in the womb, he could hear his mother's voice and other sounds in her environment. He has got the physical tools to produce sound, so lungs and voice box and that sort of thing. But it takes time for his brain to learn how to add meaning to different sounds and eventually turn noise into the structured system we call talking. And then fast forward to 3 years old, Jack is now putting together short sentences such as "where ball gone," and his mother will often ask him to put his toys away, and he can do it, although he may respond with a resounding no. So spoken language develops naturally because children have the tools within themselves and their environment to learn it. This familiarity with spoken language allows children to later attach meaning to the man-made system of written symbols. So, on to the next conundrum. How would Jack know which set of squiggles represent which spoken word? So we're now looking under the roof. Okay. So if you look at the green bits on the picture, you can see some tools there. So just under the roof, there are these tools that develop and are taught and are needed to connect spoken word forms to written word forms, the sound of the words to the squiggles that make them up. And this is where speech sound knowledge becomes really important. So let's look at the 3 key tools, the things that are just in the roof, the 3 skills children need to know. So number 1, you can see phonological awareness. And this is the understanding of how sounds make up a spoken word, including how these can be pulled together and broken apart, and other aspects such as the start and end of words and the number of syllables in a word. For example, think about the word mummy as being aware that there's a sound at the start and the end part is ummy. The whole word has 2 syllables. So it's really about understanding that a spoken word can be manipulated. It's made of separate sounds that can be split into smaller units, so individual sounds and sound chunks. So this helps children to become ready to start cracking the code for reading. And then second tool you can see in the roof is the phonics. So phonics, as you all know, is matching of the letters or groups of letters to speech sounds. For example, going back to mummy, the letter M makes the sound and the letter U makes the sound. And this skill helps children read and spell new words by sounding them out, matching them to letters, and supported by phonological awareness, so the first tool I mentioned, they can start blending those sounds together to create recognisable words. And then onto the third tool in the roof, the orthographic knowledge. So this is the knowledge stored in memory about words and word rules and includes a bank of written words that children can read by sight, so helps children to become more efficient readers. So words such as the, is, and have, and that sort of thing. And it also includes parts of words, for example, for children to read by sight. So, for example, endings such as ing and id as well. And it's also how children learn spelling rules. For example, in mummy, the y at the end of mummy sounds like e, not like the y in yellow. So all these skills enable a child to decode, in other words, work out what the written form of the word and messages mean. And it also helps the child to encode as well, turn what is said into the written equivalent. I hope that you can see on the house, there are 4 different, the blue rooms, there should be 4. I think it just hasn't turned up on the presentation, but underneath decoding there's a line as well, so it looks the same as the other side. Just thought I'd point that out just so it's not confusing as to why it looks just slightly different. Okay, so going back to Jack. So Jack is now 5 years old. Jack is in reception, and his classmates and adults in his class have no difficulty understanding what he says. He absolutely adores phonics lessons, and he's learning how each particular squiggle sounds a certain way. And his lovely range of speech sounds means that he has no difficulty saying each squiggle correctly. But he's learning more than just phonics in his phonics lessons. He's also developing great phonological awareness skills as well via rhyming and singing, syllable clapping and blending, and his all-time favourite, using robot arms to segment words and blend them together. And as such, he knows how sounds work together, which helps him work out how the squiggles work together too. And in these lessons, Jack is also getting to grips with orthographic rules through learning about sight words and exceptions. He's starting to understand how some sets of squiggles must just be remembered to learn how they sound. So let's bring this all together. We're going to go back to the house. Okay, so we've talked about lots of skills, and let's talk about how they fit together. The bottom-up language skills help us understand what we read. So there's oral receptive and oral expressive language skills. They also help us turn our thoughts and spoken words into writing. So that's the expressive side. So think of these bottom-up skills as the foundations, and these are the building blocks. These are our oral language skills, things like vocabulary, grammar, narrative. They include understanding and use of spoken language. They're what children use to make sense of what we're reading and to get our own ideas, and for the children to get their own ideas down on paper. But to read well and write well, children need the top-down skills related to speech sounds as well. And these help them to put the right sounds together in their mind to form words when they're reading, and to choose the right letters and put words together when they're writing. So the top-down skills are more about breaking the code. They help to match sounds to letters so that children can read and spell words correctly. Okay, so let's go back to Jack. So Jack has strong skills in all of the areas mentioned. This means that he can look at letters, the squiggles, and work out what they sound like. He can also take sounds and turn them into written words. So he can see the squiggle on a page, figure out the sound, and even use these sounds to write words himself. And with these skills, Jack has become a clever little code breaker, basically. He's not just sounding out words, he understands them too. And now he's starting to write his own words as well. So Jack's a bit like a mini detective, cracking the code of reading and writing. And not only can he say the words, he really gets what they mean. So let's fast forward again. And Jack is now in his final year of infant school. And at 7 years old, he's writing sentences like, the man flies a kite, or the dog has a bone. So he's starting to put his thoughts into simple, clear, written sentences. And he's also discovered a real love of reading. He loves comics, stories, fact books, and magazines. And because Jack has such strong speech and language skills, his reading and writing skills are growing too. And he's enjoying all these things immensely. And all of these skills help him succeed across all subjects. And these skills are giving him a solid foundation for school and for learning throughout life. So we talked about the house model, and the house model gives a really simple but useful model of how language skills and speech sound skills support linguistic skills to develop. But of course, it's more complicated than this, and it gets even more complicated as children learn to become skilled at literacy. So here's another analogy for you. This is the reading rope, and we're focusing now just on reading itself. So this reading rope was created by Paul et al. In 2018. So if you can see the language comprehension bit, which is at the top left-hand side, so that that rope, I guess, half a rope, and that kind of gets intertwined later on. So look at the left-hand side. That kind of corresponds to the left-hand side of our house. So the language comprehension, those language receptive skills is in the top part of the rope there. And then we have the word recognition, which is at the bottom. And that is that again starts at the left of the picture, but at the bottom. And those are the under the roof part of the house skills. So it's just illustrated differently in this way. But with this one, it shows how those skills can intermingle, how they get interwoven and connected to one another as children become more adept at using oral language skills to support reading, and word recognition skills become more automatic. So words they read also become words that they learn to say and understand when said. So the kind of skills can work with each other. It can go one way, it can go the other way. So basically, kind of the written word can support spoken word can support written word, and so on. Basically, these skills are mingling and blending with one another, and this all leads to fluent, skilled reading. And so let's go back to let's think about the house analogy again, and focusing on reading as well. I want to talk about different profiles. So we used the house to think about children with typical development, our friend Jack. So thinking about a child who has good word recognition and good language comprehension. And you can think about, to be honest with you, you can think about the reading rope, or you can think about the house analogy for this. I'll talk about things in terms of the house analogy. So yeah, you can follow that if you like. But basically, for a child who has good word recognition and good language comprehension, their house is solid and their foundations are strong and the roof is absolutely fine. So these are children who are doing really well with reading and understand language, and these are the ones we're not worried about in terms of their reading. They have good language comprehension, they've got good word recognition, and as you can see, that kind of goes towards, that kind of means that they have typical reading skills. Okay, but not every child has a house like that. Some children are really great at reading words, and their roof is really strong. But unfortunately, their foundations are rather shaky. So it means that they struggle with understanding what they read. They can decode the words, so they can kind of work out what the written word is, and they can say it. And many can even read above their age level, but they do struggle with what the words mean, and they can struggle to understand sentences and passages of text. So some can even say all the words when reading, but when they finish reading or decoding, they do not understand what they've read. So they might not know what the words mean. They might have difficulties with grammar or the structure of the story, so they don't understand the content. And these are the kind of children where you ask them, oh, tell me about the story you've read. They can only, and they might have read it out entirely really well, but they can only give scant details at the most. Or if you ask them questions for recall, like what happened there, what happened next, they might say they don't remember. So this category of these children, if you look at language comprehension poor, word recognition good, they've got specific comprehension deficits. And this can include children who are described as hyperlexic, so great at decoding but struggle with the content that they read. So going on to another category, other children have good understanding of spoken language, so their foundations are solid, but they struggle with recognising word in print. Their roof leaks, their roof is not stable. And these children are the ones that would struggle to read what is basically written, but they would be able to, if you told them the story, they'd be able to, understand that fine. So these children might be the ones, would include the ones that have dyslexia. They can talk about stories and ideas, but reading and writing are a challenge. And then we have the last category I want to talk about, the ones with mixed decoding or comprehension deficit. So these children are struggling with both language comprehension, so the foundations of the house, the foundations are shaky, and also the roof is leaking as well. And this category includes children with serious language difficulties. Maybe their challenges were not noticed early on, or they didn't get the right support. And there are so many children who fit within this category. So researchers and speech and language therapists believe that severe language difficulties or language difficulties that are not identified and supported can impact on word recognition skills. These two things can be linked together if you remember the reading rope. So, and if you think about the house analogy again, and hopefully I'm not confusing you with too many analogies, the foundations are so poor that it unsettled the house so much that it's damaged the roof too. And because of this, they're struggling with learning to read the words. So I think it's probably good to illustrate this with an example. So let's think about a girl, Amira. Yeah, back to that. Thank you so much. So she reads, that slide, that's it, great. So she reads the sentence in her book, "The owl swoops at night." So she can sound out the word swoops correctly, but she's never heard of that word before. She doesn't know this word, and she gets stuck. She's thinking to herself, am I saying it right? What does that word mean? And then maybe it isn't swoop. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's actually soup instead. I know the word soup. Maybe it's soup. So she might skip it or say it incorrectly. And her shaky foundation there, her shaky vocabulary knowledge here affects her word recognition. Maybe she's using the word soup, which is a noun. The word swoops is a verb. Maybe she has difficulties with the grammar there as well. And if she also struggles with narrative and other aspects of grammar, she has a really limited vocabulary, reading would become really, really difficult for her. So let's say she has deficits in all these difficulties and all these skills. She reads more slowly, she reads slower, as she doesn't really understand what she's read. She's less likely to be able to use clues from her grammatical knowledge. For example, this must be a verb. Or understanding narrative. Oh, this story is going to have an exciting bit in the middle to help her to decode what is written. And this sort of profile is really quite common. Research shows a big overlap between dyslexia and language needs, specifically DLD, developmental language disorder. And in fact, around 51% of children with DLD also meet the criteria for dyslexia. So it's half of those children meet the criteria for dyslexia as well. And if you think about the children with dyslexia, 55% of children with dyslexia also have co-occurring DLD. And that shows how much oral language affects reading success. And it's worth just kind of taking a moment to think, are there children at my school who might have these profiles? Do we have children who read really quickly, who seem to be able to read all the words, but don't seem to understand the content of what's said? And then thinking back to the question asked before, do our children who have dyslexia or have some difficulties with literacy, could they also have underlying speech and language needs as well? So just take a few moments just to have a little think about that. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. We've talked about the links between speech and language and reading and writing skills. And I've talked about how they're interconnected. And I've looked at the link between reading skills, reading difficulty specifically, and oral comprehension. So the next question is, how can we help students with literacy through speech and language? How can we help students to develop their literacy skills through speech and language? And it's useful to think about this, particularly for our students with speech, language and communication needs as well. So these tips will help those children, but will also help you to boost those children via speech and language. So boost the children who might be developing or having some difficulties with some aspects of literacy by supporting speech and language skills. So I've got 7 tips here for you. Always consider the language behind literacy. So why is this? If a child is finding reading or writing hard, it's always worth considering if there's an underlying language challenge. If there are issues with the content of what a child writes, or a child struggles to summarise or demonstrate understanding of written information, there are potential verbal language needs. So that could be the oral receptive language, or the oral expressive language, or both. And looking out for issues in written work or related to written work can help you to identify underlying oral language difficulties and boost these areas. So it's always good to think, is there an underlying language challenge here? The second tip is to support speech sound skills to boost phonics and literacy, specifically encoding and decoding. And this matters because if the child is struggling with those speech sound skills, they may well have these encoding and decoding skills that might be affecting that too. So if a child is struggling with spelling, blending and segmenting, you can think of phonological awareness skills. And if a child is struggling to say particular sounds correctly, they'll likely struggle to hear it, blend it and spell it too. So speech difficulties and phonological awareness difficulties can affect phonics, spelling and overall literacy progress. So the things that you can do here is work on speech sound discrimination. So tasks such as, is this a k sound or t sound with pictures for children to point? And also their production skills as well, so the speech production skills. It's also useful to think of phonological awareness activities, and many of which you will be doing anyway in your phonics lessons. So really having a big focus on the kind of first sounds and the last part of words as well, rhyming, segmenting, blending, and all of those skills. Really, the child is really struggling to get those, then think, let's do more phonological awareness activities. And if you have our Speech Link package, do check out the structured programs for speech discrimination production. And also we have some work for phonological awareness skills as well. So those things can be useful. The phonological awareness stuff can be done in the class too. So that's quite helpful to bump up those skills to support literacy. So for example, a child who says cat for cat will need explicit support to hear and say the k sound correctly. And this helps their phonics work become more effective and supports their literacy as well. Okay, so thirdly, it's important to screen for speech and language needs early, because despite best efforts, children with SLCN, especially those with the receptive language needs, can still and often do go unnoticed. So it's really best to pick these up as early as you can to reduce the impact they have on future literacy difficulties. So use a speech screen tool or a language screen tool to identify these needs as early as you can. So, for example, we've got the packages that include both screening and targeted interventions, and you can support speech sounds via Speech Link and language via Language Link from the start, all of which feeds into later literacy success. So, for example, a reception-aged pupil might have a shaky language foundation for literacy, and with a screen they can be picked up and worked with before these areas have a heavy impact on learning to read and write. Without the screen, these difficulties might go unnoticed and have a major impact on literacy that will only be seen later. Okay, the fourth top tip is to use oral language activities, spoken language activities to support literacy activities. So if a child struggles with reading comprehension or sentence writing, strengthening their spoken language can help. So things that you can do are pre-teach key vocabulary verbally before reading a text, practice verbal sentence building for those who struggle to put together the written sentences. So say it first, maybe look at a picture, say it first before writing down the sentence. And always back up, well, often as much as you can, back up learning with the visuals. So pictures, photos and diagrams can all lend support to understanding both written and verbal language and create a bridge for supporting both. So an example could be, before reading a story about rainforests, talk about the words like canopy and humid and habitat using real life pictures and explanations, as this can give children the language to understand the text when they're reading. The fifth top tip is to create word maps to strengthen vocabulary and spelling, because these are really great. These can really strengthen understanding and word recognition from print and writing of the word, especially if you build in both what the word means, so those kind of underlying languagey type things, and how it sounds, so those kind of top-down skills, those speech sound skills, the kind of phonological awareness aspects of it as well. So you've got the semantics and the phonological and sound aspects of the word, kind of all encompassing the words. So you can create a word map for important words. When we say important words, think about those words that would be used in different subjects that are really kind of, that can be carried over, the ones that if a child kind of grasps the understanding of that word and can use that word, it can really set some really great foundations for kind of future learning about the topic. Those kind of words, what we would call Goldilocks words. And with these word maps, you could include, it would be good to include the word's meaning, so what the word means, have a picture or various pictures, how it sounds as well, and examples of use in a sentence. And revisit your word maps regularly and talk through them as well. So chat through the word maps, maybe do some games around the word maps as well, ask them, what's this word, and give all the clues around the word, that sort of thing, to really kind of cement that learning. So an example could be, for the word enormous, you could have a picture of a large elephant and some other large things as well. Perhaps have a picture of tiny things that are crossed out to contrast. And you put your definition, like very, very big. And you'd have a sound breakdown as well, so enormous. And also put the number of claps, so the number of syllables too. And then put down an example sentence or a few example sentences. So, for example, the enormous elephant stomped through the jungle. It'd be good to have that as a sentence, so that a child can see where it would fit when it is used when talking or in reading. So that was the 5th tip: use spoken language activities, sport literacy activities. Oh, that was, create word maps to strengthen vocabulary and spelling. I've done the other one. And then on to the 6th one, use coding systems to link verbal language and literacy. So I'm sure you've all seen these tools like colourful semantics and shape coding and language through colour. These are excellent for visually showing children how language is structured, and they help children understand both spoken and written language more clearly. So they kind of make the hidden rules of language more visible. And this is really helpful for children who struggle to understand how sentences are built or how to express their ideas clearly. So colourful semantics is really great to kind of get the meaning behind the words, where the places are for those specific words. You can link the pictures to the vocabulary by using the card, so the picture on the card and the word underneath, and you can say it. So there's all kind of the three areas that are really useful to kind of the picture to bridge the gap between the written word and the spoken word. You've got the written word and you'll be saying it as well. So all of those things all at once. And with shape coding, that's kind of more to do with the grammatical aspects of how these sentences can be manipulated and changed around. Both of these are really helpful. Both are slightly different, so do have a look into them. And what you can do here is use one of the systems consistently in interventions and across the classroom. So maybe you'd be really sticking to shape coding, using that same system consistently in interventions and across the classroom, and apply them to verbal tasks, written activities, and even one helping children to answer questions. So colourful semantics is really good for those question words. And this joined up approach helps children to transfer what they've learned in one area to another. So by seeing, let's say, colourful semantics, the same colour cues, the shapes, the patterns used across activities, children begin to grasp how sentences work, whether they're saying them or writing them. And yeah, let's take colourful semantics as an example. As I said, this uses coloured cards to represent different parts of a sentence. And here's, it might look like, with orange being a who, it's got maybe a picture of dad, yellow being a what doing, a picture of sleeping, and blue for a where, a picture of on the sofa. And a child can physically build the sentence using these coloured cards, or they can use the colours as prompts for saying or writing a sentence. And this gives them a clear visual structure for saying the sentence aloud and then writing it down. And they can also use for understanding of questions as well. So talking about colourful semantics again, teachers could colour code question words to match the sentence parts. So if they're, for example, writing down a question on the board, they can put a line underneath to say what kind of question it is. So if it's a who question, there'll be an orange line. If it's a blue question, if it's a where question, it'll be a blue line. This helps children to understand what's being asked, whether in spoken questions or written comprehension tasks. So, for example, if it's a spoken question, you can hold up one of the cards, the coloured cards, That can be really helpful for children to understand what is being asked about. So visual systems like colourful semantics makes language concrete and accessible, and they bridge spoken and written language in a way that is clear, consistent and transferable. The last top tip is talking through stories to build meaning and engagement. So talking about the pictures, the stories and the tricky words builds understanding and makes reading more meaningful. And I'm sure you'll do this anyway, but yeah, it's good to keep doing it and to do it lots and lots and lots. So what you can do is pause during reading to ask questions. You can explain new words in the moment. You can encourage predictions and emotional responses, and you can do even more with it. For example, act out the scenarios. You can bring props in. For those younger children, you can have costumes in a corner for children to use in free play so they can kind of dress up as characters. And when using oral language, use lots of tone and expression to bring the written word alive as well. So prompts such as, I wonder what might happen next, or look at this picture, how's the dog feeling? Or if the word says impossible, you could go, this word says impossible. This means he couldn't do it. It was too hard. And these discussions give the story more depth and help children link spoken and written language together. So going on to the final slide, thank you. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away today, it's this message. So strong speech and language skills support literacy. So when we think about reading and writing, it's really easy to focus on phonics and on spelling. But underneath all of that is language, how well a child understands words, put sentences together and make sense of stories. That's what really drives literacy. So when a child struggles with reading and writing, it's often linked back to verbal language difficulties. Maybe they don't know the meaning of the words, maybe they struggle with grammar, maybe they find it hard to express their thoughts clearly. But the good news is that every time we support vocabulary, every time we build grammar and sentence skills, every time that we work on comprehension of stories, we're also strengthening literacy. And for those children with weak phonological awareness and speech sound difficulties, it's really important that we work on those aspects too to support encoding and decoding. So even the small changes in how we support speech and language can make a real difference. And that's why speech and language support is so essential in helping children to succeed right across the curriculum. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. I think I've got one more slide with some contact details, some information there. What do we have? We have our help desk. So if you are a subscriber, you can always contact our help desk and you can speak to one of us about any kind of difficulties that you might be having. For example, if you're kind of on a speech program or whatever and you're getting stuck with a child's speech sounds and you would like some advice, then you can get through to the speech and language team and we can support you there. If you want to know where the phonological awareness stuff is, then you can always call up or email help desk. We have our speechandlanguage.link, which gives you more information about our packages, but also allows you to access our link community as well. So that is a really it's a really useful site that you sign up to get information about blogs, and we've got magazines too. We have some videos, we have some top tips, we have a parent portal that you can share with parents that you work with. And they get access to different kinds of activities as well. We've got our Facebook page and then a Facebook group as well, and that's basically a community of TAs and teachers and people who work in schools who all kind of share their experiences and ask others to, for ideas and that sort of thing. It's quite a nice little friendly group. So if you fancy joining that, that's really great. Yeah, and same goes in there too. And then of course you can have a free language link trial or a free speech link trial as well. So yeah, if you're interested in any of those, just take those details. Okay, and I'm ready to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, we've put a prompt in the chat, but nobody's asked any yet, so we'll give them a minute or two to come up with any. I've got one for you though. So lots of students are more likely to be identified as having a literacy difficulty than having an underlying speech and language difficulty. Because we test literacy all the time. We do spelling tests, we do reading tests, we notice it possibly more than that underlying speech and language difficulty. And then we go and put in place,
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and we've got
Yeah,
the data for it.
yeah.
And we go and put in place a literacy intervention because we think we're addressing literacy. Are we in danger of losing the speech and language need? Are we going to cause any harm by putting a literacy intervention in place, I suppose is where I'm trying to go. Or is that going to help? Or should we be looking for something else?
I mean, it can help. It can help in some ways, depending on what kind of things you're putting in place, I would expect. I'll give you a personal example. My son does have. I used to have a few little difficulties with his speech sounds. And I mean, this is when he was younger, and I basically supported him by doing a lot of jolly phonic stuff. I know that's not stuff you do anymore, but I thought it was
Jolly
useful.
phonics.
And he started getting a kind of really good grasp of the written letters and that sort of thing. You're getting a really good grasp of how to put those letters together. And so in a way, I used those written word skills to support his underlying speech and what's turning out to be language difficulties as well. So there are various ways to do it. Some children, as I mentioned before, with those children who've got really quite good decoding and encoding skills, they are not understanding the underlying meaning of the words, but that can kind of hook them in. If you add a couple of pictures and that sort of thing, then they might be able to use those skills to then support their spoken language skills instead. But I mean, I would say it is definitely worth considering those underlying language skills. I think there'll be more progress in many ways for lots of children if you are supporting those underlying skills as well. And there'll be like also an impact across different areas as well. So when the teacher is speaking or when they need to, talk as well, then those skills will be supported. So I would say, it can help. It's good to kind of monitor and see if that child is getting particularly frustrated, but it's better, I would say, to be working with those underlying skills. You'd be supporting them more that way.
And I suppose if they're put into a literacy intervention and they're not making progress in the literacy intervention, it
Hmm.
might not actually be a literacy need as such. It could be
Yeah.
something else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's when it's worth kind of thinking about it. I mean, it does give a really good clue as to which children might have those underlying needs. And it's a vast number if you think about those ones with dyslexia and DLD, when we're not even thinking about those other children that have other language difficulties. But those children with dyslexia and DLD, that's 50, 51, 55%. That's huge. So it's definitely worth having a think about. And, if you do have a screen, as I said, it's worth using that screen on those children.
And I suppose the other one is primary schools tend to be pretty good because their teachers see them all day. They're more likely to pick up on nuances of language, etc. But we need to train secondary staff better, don't we?
Yeah, there's a bit of a unfortunately, yeah, there's a bit of a shortage of speech and language therapists at secondary level, and I do feel as well there's such a big there's a heavy kind of load on literacy. Like literacy skills become really quite complex, really that literacy becomes heavier, doesn't it,
Yeah.
at that level? And there's all those, and then there's even more of those underlying skills which they're talking about. There's a lot of inference, predictions, there's a lot of nuanced things in literacy. You can start really kind of losing pupils at that stage. Yes, it'd be really great if there was more training at that level. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
We need to recruit some secondary speech and language therapists.
Indeed, yes, that's it. I think the thing is, with speech and language therapists in England, we are really basically all like kind of verbal speech and language as opposed to those literacy skills. That's in Australia, I think, and America and Canada, they do both. We
Okay.
do the one, and I kind of think that it would be great for us therapists to have more training in that and be able to support both. Although there aren't very many therapists, so it's quite hard for that to happen. But yes, I mean it's such a useful area to think about, and it's so important to be able to identify the children that are struggling.
Absolutely. And I just from personal experience, I think that primary age children, they're a little bit like sheep. They can kind of follow what everybody else is doing in the class. And they, if somebody else is lining up, they'll pick up on that. They'll pick up on those cues and they'll pick up on
Yeah,
the language that's used, because they're with the same teacher all day, so that,
Yes.
constructing a sentence, they kind of hear it and they'll repeat it, become like little parrots. And then they move into a secondary environment and they haven't got that to follow, and they haven't got the same voice at them. And speech and language, it's almost like everything falls apart for them, because they
Mm.
don't have that anymore. They haven't got that structure. And at secondary, we don't have the, teaching staff. We certainly don't get any training on it when we do teacher training. We're not trained to
That's such a
pick up on
shame.
those things. Well,
Yeah.
no surprise there, really, is it? It's one day to do all of SCN, every single need
Mm.
possible. So it's really quite difficult to identify where that need is. And of course, we'll notice it more as a literacy difficulty, or they're not engaging in my lesson, or it's a
Yeah.
behaviour, or something else
Yeah.
instead.
That's it, isn't it? Because all of these difficulties with speech and language can lead to difficulties with literacy, and then that could lead to difficulties with behaviour. All these things are kind of interconnected in that way. So if a child is struggling throughout the day with their reading, with their writing, and that's like day in, day out of different teachers, that sort of thing, that can really impact on them emotionally. It can impact on their behaviours. They can become, less likely to be wanting to do the work and not really kind of understanding the underlying language difficulties that they have. And in secondary, it can actually, sometimes it can become more apparent. Sometimes it can be a lot less apparent, because, they're really masking it at this stage. And they might be masking unintentionally. They're just like, well, I just don't really understand what's going on, but maybe no one does. And we're just going to keep a bit quiet because I don't want to seem like the person who doesn't really get anything. There's a lot going on. So yeah, it would be really great if these things can be tackled early, but at the same time, for secondary teachers to go, actually, there might be some underlying difficulties here. Literacy could be because of, difficulties with literacy, difficulties with behaviour, could be to do with underlying speech and language difficulties. If we could get that message kind of right across secondary, that'd be absolutely amazing. That'd be so good.
Somebody's put a comment in the chat.
Okay.
They obviously work as a speech and language therapist because they work in secondaries. There is such a need, and they're lucky that it's being recognised. They've done phonics training in secondary. Interestingly,
Brilliant.
I got pulled into an AP, so alternative provision, and they recognised it's for 13 plus. They recognised that the students that were coming into them probably had speech and language needs, but also that their phonics was absolutely appalling, and the
Wow.
teaching staff in there didn't actually have those skills. So they pulled me in, and I did I think it must have been 6, maybe 8 sessions with them, teaching those staff on basic, primary infant school phonics, so that they could then support those children. It was
That's
really
brilliant.
interesting, though. It was
That's
good.
really interesting, actually. It's interesting how that hadn't been, picked up specifically from like before then. I mean, I've worked with pupils who, slightly different, but I've worked with pupils who seemed absolutely fine, like on the surface level, at secondary, just a little bit quiet maybe, and they were a bit cheeky, but underneath everything, when I started kind of pulling everything back, I had them for certain sessions, and I did a few kind of very kind of the maybe kind of in junior school level, I would say junior school assessments on them. Then there was some really big gaps in the vocabulary, and it would have been so hard to pick up on without really pulling those things apart because of the way they were masking, of the way they were, the way they presented. So yeah, absolutely fascinating, really, how these skills are often undetected.
Absolutely. So if anybody else has got any questions, please do throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to let Yin go and get fish and chips or whatever it is on a Thursday. It's not a Thursday, is it? Wednesday night. Wednesday night for you.
Wednesday.
There I am thinking I've got fish and chips
Tomorrow.
tonight. Fine. Oh, we've got on there. So the same person is thinking about how to teach the phonics. If they haven't got it by year 5, teaching it it really doesn't help teaching it the exact same way. Something doesn't work, let's throw more of it at them. No, that doesn't work at all, does it? We do have to find different ways of doing it. Yes, thank you for that, Helen. No other
and it may well be like phonological awareness skills. It may be certain skills in those phonics lessons that need to be really heavily looked at and worked with. And then, if these things don't work, then be kind of pulling it back into smaller steps and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Maybe I identifying the value of it as well. Because of course, by the time we've got to secondary, it's like, well, why have I got to learn this? Is it
Yeah,
understanding?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it can
I'm
feel
not
quite difficult for secondary aged pupils to be doing phonics that was done in reception. So
absolutely.
yeah, it's kind of important to be able to acknowledge that this is going to be tricky for them, and but it has a really important it's really important for them as well, and just teaching it in a age appropriate way that doesn't make them feel bad, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. There used to be a really good reading series, and it's no longer in publication. I really need to get hold of the publishers and find out whether they'll re-release it. But that was really good for teaching phonics to secondary age pupils, and actually gave
Oh,
them
brilliant.
age appropriate texts that they could use
Yeah.
as well. Because that's the big struggle. Yes, okay, we've got easy readers, but it's not quite the same as a phonics reader where we're focusing on those high frequency words and the phonics and the other bits. But anyway, that's my
I might
bugbear
have
about
more
that.
questions.
Have you got more questions?
I might do. I was
Oh,
wondering
hold
why
on.
something was going off in my head.
If something's going off in Gavin's
I know,
head.
it's kind of
That
worrying.
doesn't happen
Oh,
very often.
Hold on.
Have you found us one?
Really great session this afternoon. I didn't have a question. Oh, I didn't have a question, but I was.
oh,
It wasn't letting me join into chat. It was sending an error. Okay. Okay. Don't worry.
Fine. Okay. So just somebody saying it was a fantastic session. There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, we should
oh,
take that one.
I'm glad.
So I think we'll all take
Thank you
that
so
one,
much.
and thank you. We'll all take that one, and we'll run for the evening. Go and enjoy whatever is left of the bit of sun that's still lurking in the sky. And we will see. Well, I will see everybody tomorrow, hopefully, for another session. I'm talking about closing the year strong. I'm going to get the title right at some point, which is basically summing up everything we've done so far this year and what we can do to make sure we finish the last 8-9 weeks with our brains still intact.
And I will be finishing the Senko planner.
Oh. Yep, Gavin's managed to get his left and right muddled up again in the planner. He's sorting it.
No, I haven't.
I'll be
Bless.
watching TV and eating snacks.
That sounds even better. Brilliant. Okay, everybody, take care. We will see you all soon, and
you.
look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow. Thank you very much, Ian. Bye bye.